This is a surprise.
I prefer the real Sherman tank. I said the real Sherman tank.
Perfection.
Hey everyone, this is John from EastCoastArmory.com, and I'm here today with a model showcase video for this 1/35th scale T6 medium tank. The model that you see here is built for my own personal collection and is not for sale and or purchase. However, as I often mention in these videos, I frequently take on commission build projects from models ranging between 1/35th scale and 1/6 scale. For availability and pricing information, that would be best by contacting me through the email address listed below, which is info@EastCoastArmory.com. Even though this model started off as a kit, specifically a 1/35th scale 3D printed resin kit, the model did undergo quite a bit of extra modifications and details, bringing it up to the condition that we have here. In this video, we're going to be reviewing the base starter kit, as well as also going over the kit's cool features and all the extra detail modifications that went into the build, bringing it up to the way you see it presently. So stay tuned, because there's going to be a bunch of really cool info coming right at you. To kick this video off, let's go ahead and take a quick walk around the model. And today we have a really cool one for you. This here is the T6 medium tank. The T6 is literally the birth of the Sherman. This vehicle here dates back to the late 1930s, early 1940s time frame. However, you could argue that the design or the inception of this vehicle goes further back to the interwar time frame. During this period, the US Army Corps were working on their next generation of military vehicles, specifically their tanks, and the vehicle that was chosen and entered into service was the M2 series. The M2 was an interesting vehicle, but it was definitely a product of its era. It utilized mostly flat plate construction, and it had a fully revolving turret with a 37mm main armament. The vehicle was also bristling with MGs. Again, this was something that was more or less akin to the designs that preceded it, that came out of the World War I time frame. However, what the M2 did was it gave the US Army Corps basically the layout for what was to come. More specifically, it gave us the design for the track and the running gear, as well as also the basic layout of the hull, where the engine would be mounted in the rear. You'd have a drive shaft that powers a transmission in the front, and then basically everything else is built upon it. Although the M2 was fulfilling the needs at the time, what the Army really wanted was they wanted a medium tank with a 75mm armament. More ideally, a vehicle with a fully revolving turret with said 75. However, at the time, the manufacturing just didn't have the capabilities of producing an all-cast turret, as well as other large cast amenities that are required to fulfill such a vehicle's role. So what they did was they went ahead and came up with an interim tank design, which was going to bridge the gap, give the Army something to use and equip themselves with, and buys time for the manufacturing to catch up with the design that is going to be needed. And of course, this led to the M3 Lee. The M3 Lee utilized what was the manufacturing techniques at the time that were perfected, be it smaller type castings, as well as also rolled flat plate construction that's riveted together. Of course, the M3 is iconic for its interior and weapon layout, where we have the main armament 75 located in a hull sponson, much along the lines of an old battleship, and the vehicle features a fully revolving turret with a 37. And again, just like a carryover from the previous design, the thing had lots of MGs. The M3 was approved for service, entered into production, and was fielded by the US Army. And then it had its own development track that goes into World War II, but that's a story for another video. During all of this time when the M3 was getting designed and getting ready for manufacture, at the same time, the US Army Corps were working on the vehicle that was going to replace it. And this, of course, would eventually lead up to the M4 Sherman. But the vehicle that was adopted, or I should say the design that was chosen, was none other than the T6. The T6 was going to utilize what worked on the M3, which was the lower hull, and just basically build upon it. So the vehicle was going to be powered by the exact same engine, being the radial. The vehicle also utilized the same transmission, or one that was relatively very close to it, and it also kept the VVSS suspension. The vehicle also was going to keep the same lower hull that was at the time riveted, and again, this was just a straight up carryover from what was working and what the industry was able to produce at that time. Where the T6 differed from the M3 was with the upper hull and up. Unlike the M3 Lee, which utilized the mosaic type assembly with rolled steel and small cast components that were riveted together, the T6 was going to encompass a single armored steel casting. The steel casting was going to be round and curved in shape, which gave it some excellent ballistic protection from almost any angle. In addition to the hull, the turret was also going to be a single steel rounded casting, which was going to house a 75mm main armament. What made the T6 so unique was that it featured many carryover features from the M3 design. Such examples would be the very prominent side axis hatch doors that are found on the sides of the hull, as well as also the M3 Lee Commander's turret cupola that was going to be mounted on top of the vehicle. The vehicle's hull also had many characteristics of the M3A1 Lee, which also utilized an all-cast hull instead of the mosaic type design found on the earlier pattern of vehicle. Also, like what was on the M3 design, the vehicle was going to be bristling with MGs, aside from the one for the Commander's cupola. The vehicle utilized 3 M1919s mounted in the hull, 2 of which are mounted permanently to the body and are controlled by the driver, and the third one was actually mounted on the radio operator side and was in a ball mount, which is something, of course, that would carry on with the design. Of course, the vehicle also utilized a coax M1919 in the turret adjacent to the main 75. The design was initially greenlit for further testing and evaluation, and several mock-ups were produced. The first one was an all-plywood mock-up that was just used to get the basic feel and shape of the vehicle. The second was a plywood mock-up, or I should say it was a plywood upper hull and turret mounted on a M3 Lee lower chassis, again to see the viability of the design. And then eventually a pilot model was produced. In addition to a fully functional pilot model, several other castings were produced by the foundries, and these were sent to APG for use of testing, where they did ballistics testing on it by literally just shooting at it to see the viability of the vehicle's design, as well as also the composition of the steel armor. After research and development was done, it was deemed that the T6 was a viable design and was what the Army was looking for. However, it could use some alterations before it could enter into full production. And many of these alterations were the elimination of many of the M3 Lee features that carried over. The most prominent change from the T6 to the production vehicle was with the elimination of the side hatches found on the side of the hull. These were deemed to be a weak point in the armor, and they were promptly eliminated, making it for a continuous smooth casting. Now for the crew to enter into the hull, there are done by 2 hatches found on the top of the vehicle. The driver had his own hatch originally, however, the radio operator had to originally come in from the side. Now he has his own hatch on top of the front hull. The turret also has some revisions that were requested, namely the elimination of the 2 M3 Lee pattern of hinged pistol ports that were found on either side of the turret. The one on the commander side was outright eliminated, while the one on the reverse side was retained. However, this would be evolved into a shell ejection port rather than a vision slotted pistol port that we have on the T6. The vehicle also had a built-in optic for the main 75. This was going to be revised with a much simpler design, which would carry over into the actual production vehicles. Also, one feature that was eliminated, which sadly is actually a pretty cool one on the T6, was the M3 Lee pattern of Commander Mini Turret Cupola that was, again, a carryover from the M3 Lee. This was eliminated, and in its place, a split hatch Commander's Cupola ring would be added in place, and of course, this was something that would be seen on the vehicles that entered into full production. After these revisions were made, several other prototypes were produced in that type of format, and the vehicle at that point was ready for full production and was designated the medium tank M4. Of course, this would be known as the Sherman. And at that point there, the design of the T6 really comes to an end. The T6 was a prototype vehicle. It never entered into production. Only one was ever produced, and it never was fielded or saw combat or anything along those lines. However, the story doesn't really just end there, because throughout the entirety of the World War II timeframe, the T6 stayed at Aberdeen Proving Ground and was used as a test bed to test many new features and many new fittings that were designed for the other vehicles that were in production. The T6 is seen in photographs testing new types of track, bolt-on armor type systems, as well as also several other types of internal equipment were first pre-tested on the T6 prior to further development. Then a giant mystery happens with this vehicle, where at the end of the war, it literally just disappears. There's one photograph known of the T6 at the very tail end of its known life, where in 1947 it was photographed in a field at APG and had some interesting features on it that were being tested, or at one point in time. However, after that, the vehicle just falls off the face of the earth. More than likely, sadly, the vehicle is probably just written off and scrapped, as it was no longer necessary. And sadly, the T6, as far as anyone knows, is no more. However, the vehicle's legacy, of course, is one that can be seen in the M4 Sherman, and that is a legacy that will live on for eons. Before we go any further with the video, let's go ahead and take a step back to when the model was first started in order to get a good idea on what the base starter kit supplies you with. And here's the model at the start of the build. For the base starter kit, I'll be utilizing this 1/35 scale T6 medium tank kit from the company SS Model. For anyone who's a frequent viewer of the channel, first I want to give you my obligatory thank you for that, but you'll also know that this is not the first time a model kit from this company has been brought on the table here for review. A little while ago, I went ahead and did another one of their kits, being the British Independent Heavy Tank, and of course that video can be found on the ECA channel. This kit here is going to be very similar with the way the kit is designed as the other one, as well as also with the media that the kit is made in. At the moment, you'll see that the model is not exactly in the as shipped format. The box is open, and there's a reason for that. I'll go over it momentarily. It's not anything bad or anything, but it is something I am going to briefly mention. But regardless, as for the company SS Model themselves, this is a relatively newcomer to the market. They've been around, as far as I can tell, for the last 5 or so years. And what's interesting about their kits is that the medium that they are rendered in. Unlike the other kits that have been brought on this channel in the past, specifically the 135s, which are made out of injection molded polystyrene, SS kits are made from 3D printed resin. And this lends itself for some very interesting subject matter, but also some excellent detail fidelity, which will be found on the surfaces. Like I stated in the independent video, it's models like this that I always really found to be very interesting, because it's just so much different and off the beaten path compared to the, typical builds that are generally rendered out by other companies, and namely the mainstream ones. Although I gotta say, in recent years this has definitely changed quite a bit, and a lot of the more obscure and prototype subjects have been covered by those bigger companies, but it just shows you just how big of a pool there is out there of really cool vehicles that have been ignored for the longest time. And SS models are giving the builders an opportunity to build out these models in a multitude of scales. So they have kits, as far as I've seen, in 1/72, 1/48, 1/35, and now they've even crossed over into 1/16 with a barrage of new kits, which are something I definitely want to get my hands on, but that was, of course, your topics for another day. Regardless, the other thing about the SS kits is that they are very affordable, and this is something that makes them very, very interesting, and as well as a way to collect and build out very cool models, and do so that's a fraction of the budget. This is very similar, like I mentioned in the other video, of back in the 1990s, where if you wanted anything really interesting or different, you would have to find a garage kit of one make or another. Some examples that would come to mind would be CMK or the company Accurate Armor, where these kits were, subject matters that were completely unique and interesting, but the material was not injection molded polystyrene, it was cast resin. And this is back in the day when the parts were literally just cast resin, much along the lines as, the detail parts that I produce in 1/6 scale and 1/16. But fast forward to, where we are today, The cast resin market has definitely been transformed into a 3D print market, and that is, basically what we have here. The technology lent itself for some very accurately detailed and highly detailed fittings, but also in a way that makes them easily assembled, and much more so compared to the older generation kits, like the ones from the 90s. The other thing to point out is the cost on these models. They tend to be much more cost-friendly compared to some of the other options that I referenced before. For instance, the independent tank, the one from Accurate Armor back in the day, was about 150 to about, I think, $200 US, compared to the SS kit, which is about, 70 or 80 with shipping included. This one here, the kit itself was about 60 US dollars, but with shipping and everything, it was slightly under 80. So, it is on the, you could say, on the more steeper end for a 135, but it's definitely within the ballpark, and I've seen other 135th scale kits that are similar in price range, again, with the shipping and everything factored in. As for availability, these are fairly commonly found, but these are not the type of things that you're going to find in a hobby shop. These kits here are sold on the internet, and if you don't like eBay, you're going to be basically SOL trying to get one of these kits, because these kits here are primarily sold on that venue. The model I picked up from the following vendor. The link is listed below in the video description. If I'm not mistaken, I believe that they are the sole distributor, or they have some kind of tie-in with the company, because they seem to be the vendor that comes up whenever you search for their merchandise. The vendor, I will say, is very reputable. They came in handy with the independent tank, where I needed not one but two replacement parts about a month or so apart from one another, and they definitely came in and saved the day and sent me the parts for free. So customer service I found to be absolutely excellent with this vendor, so buy from them with sheer confidence, best way to put it. Enough with that, let's go and get to the graphic design. So the SS Models kits come in a very simple type box, again harking back to the old school garage kits that I was referencing before, where it is a flip open type box, and on the cover here we have a very simple little graphic. I believe this may have changed in recent months, as they have some different type of marketing on their eBay page, but the one I have is the one we have here. This kit, by the way, I again purchased it off of eBay back in March or so it hasn't been sitting in the stash for too long, and because of that, the surface, well, does have some dust on it. Well, my filming area is actually pretty dusty. Looks like I got some cleaning to do, but regardless, this thing is actually a fairly newcomer to the stash. The graphic design, again, very simple. We have a cool rendering of the T6 medium tank right there on its checkerboard base. We got the logo of the company right there in the corner. Fully 3D printed. And there goes the namesake and the verbiage. And that's it for graphic design. So, as I mentioned before, the box, you can see, was opened at one point, and this was to check just to see if everything was on the up and up. As I mentioned before, the independent tank, I had a problem with the model when it came in. It had some significant damage on it, and so I wanted to just, check my bases on this one here just to make sure everything was okay, to which, when I checked it out earlier, it was. But the model itself was actually very nicely packed. You can see it has this cool foam insert that we have right over here. And that's really it for that. So this brings us to the parts in question. The SS kits are all printed in this flesh color 3D printed resin. This is the same type of material that I've seen on the other kit that I was referencing, but I've also seen it used on several other mainstream 3D print model kits on the market. Some come to mind would, I believe, be T-Rex, and I think Dragon also has been re-releasing some of their older legacy kits with the same type of parts printed in this material here. So whatever it is, it does yield for some excellent detail fidelity, and also some very nice smooth surfaces, which for a 3D printed model kit is definitely something you want to look for. So starting with the first bag, this is the turret. So I'm going to carefully try to take it out of the bag here. So here you can see the way it looks. If anyone has seen the other review that I've done, this should look very familiar. So the turret is a single printing where it has the mantlet, the coax, even the MP48 spring antenna base integrally printed on. We have all of the appropriate detailings for the really cool T6 version of the Sherman. It's not even, wouldn't even have been the Sherman yet. It predates that, but we have the elevating visor right over there. Kind of reminded me of an old fast food restaurant drive-through type thing from back in the 80s. The MP48 is very nicely rendered out. You can see the insulator as well as the spring. And it's basically on par with several other plastic kits. For the Coax MG, they did the really cool thing where they rendered it out as the very pre-war version of the 1919, generally made by Colt, where the cooling shroud, instead of being ventilated with round holes, as was classically seen on that unit, this one here, it has the cooling vents as slits. Again, exactly what it would be for the real unit. The surface is nice and smooth. The death nail of many homebrew 3D print kits out there are the print lines, and this is something not found on this product here. The lines are very, very smooth, and once this thing paints over, it will look absolutely perfect. The one thing that is missing, though, are cast texturing. That's not something that you will generally see on 3D printed model kits. That's something that is probably going to be improving as time goes on. Probably within the next 10 or 15 years, you will see the print resolution get to that point where they can actually render that. But for the time being, generally the kits we see that are 3D printed with this media tend to be smooth in nature. But obviously that's something that could easily be corrected on the build, and quite up to standards we've seen on other plastic kits. So it's not like, one is really better than the other in that regard. As for the turret, it is, and also this is true for many other parts, it's printed on a pouring basin, or I should say a stand that we have here. It's resin terminology. And we have this intricate girder type setup, and this is something that's generally seen on resin 3D prints. I believe the plate is upside down or something, and then it lifts it up, or it depends on the machine being used. But I've seen this type of setup on many other 3D printed components made with a similar material. It's going to be actually interesting snipping all these off, and it's actually part of the charm and fun with building one of these kits. I can speak from personal experience on that one. So that's the turret, and this leads us to the largest component on the entire model, and that is the hull. And even when I first saw the T6 all of those years ago, I definitely appreciated what it was and how cool it is. And here we have it right here. So the model is basically a fusion of M3 Lee and M4, which would eventually become the M4A1. And you can see a lot of those features found on this example here. And they really did a very good job with rendering out these subtle details. If anyone has ever looked at photographs of the T6, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. So from here, you can see the driver's hatches, or I should say the driver's hatch. The other crew member did not even have a hatch at that point. That was a luxury that came a little bit later on. The bow antenna base is in a well, as you can see. And we have a carryover from the M3 Lee, where we have a bunch of machine guns found on the front. Just like with the one found on the turret, they are the appropriate pre-war versions of the Colt 1919 with the slotted shrouds. The other thing I want to point out is, again, with this technology here, you can do things that you can't do with the other mediums. For instance, you can have as many sub-assembly detail components integrally printed on as one single unit. Normally on kits like this, you would have to glue all these components on. The MGs definitely being one of them. But some of the other details that stick right out would be the headlights and the brush guards. Normally, obviously, these are separate components. Not on here. Hatches, even the handles, integrally printed on, single unit. Arguably, you could say this makes for a more simplistic and a boring build, but it is one that does, definitely save some time. I do see some slight damage over here where the one grab handle is broken off. Not too uncommon. This is something that obviously I can fix in no time, but it is something I did want to reference. Got the gas caps, the grill work on the back, and also we have the Pioneer tools integrally printed on. This is something I'm actually, again, on the fence about. Generally, I like to paint these separately off the model, and usually when you see integrally molded on tools, it's generally on older kits that are on the market, and you have to carefully paint. But this one here, it's kind of a throwback to that type of setup. For me, I could definitely work around and paint them. It's not a problem. But if this is an issue to you, luckily these are just standard US GI Tank Pioneer tools. And if you're clever enough, you could easily polish them away and then replace them with either a set of, spare ones that you might have in your spare bin. And I believe Formations, I don't even know if they're even still around, used to actually make some nice cast resin Pioneer tools for American tanks, but I'm kind of showing my age now because I'm not even sure if they're even still in business. But regardless, this one here, it looks like that it was printed in 2 halves. I guess they must have ran out of resin in the tub when the thing was printing out, and because of that, this one does have a slight shift here. That always seems to happen, even with cast resin. If you have a half mold and you just pour more resin in, it always never comes out perfectly straight. This is something that's pretty much atypical, but this is something for this vehicle here is not a problem because it's all cast. It could easily be polished in it or blended in with the cast texturing. So we'll see how that pans out. Overall, I'm really happy with the quality that we have here. Again, the vehicle has many features that are generally seen on the M3A1 Lee, like the geometry here of the rear area. We'll see more of that once the piece is fully fred. I could definitely see the pepper pot exhaust. I don't know if that's visible on the camera, but I could see those back there as well as some of the other details. It's going to be interesting to see how they free up. The underhull here has the riveting that is present, and also the underhull is littered with riveting. I will say that this does appear to me to be a smaller scale model that was simply just blown up to 135, as opposed to something that was designed from the get-go to be in this scale. Just with the way some of the rivets are rendered out, it tends to lend itself to that, as well as also the tools being integrally printed. But, for what it's worth, it seems to be perfectly fine. Obviously, this thing has lots of girders that are going to need to be cut away. And again, that's part of the charm about working on one of these kits. With the hull set safely aside, this brings us to some of the other smaller fittings. So, starting with the main armament, the piece is in this nice protective column box that we have right here, and it actually has the appropriate dual counterweights that we have right there on the front. This is basically the same setup that you see on the M3 Lee, but the Lee only utilizes one of those counterweights, and the T6 is cooler, so it utilizes 2. Very iconic bit of detailing for this vehicle. Of course, the quality of the fasteners are excellent that are found on the counterweights themselves, and it'll look even better once it gets painted and has the panel line accent added in place. The next component is the cupola, and the cupola is straight up M3 Lee, where it was kind of like the M60, where we have that mini turret cupola thing for the tank commander. And the piece is rendered out exquisitely. The hatch is integrally printed in the shut state. To some people, this might be a ding because a lot of people out there like to render their tanks with the hatches open to have a figure placed in it or for a diorama. If that's you, maybe you might want to kit bash something if that's the case. But what's, again, nice is they rendered out the hinge detailing. I believe that's a flare gun porthole where you could open up and shoot out a flare, or even utilize a flag, because that's how how early this vehicle is, in case the radio isn't installed or it doesn't work. But we also have the hatch stops and the hatch clips, which are right there and there. Most 135s do not have that. We have the fasteners for the bearing ring right there on the bottom. Hopefully that comes out on camera. And of course, this also has the slotted 1919 shroud, as I referenced before. The muzzle end is integrally printed, drilled out, so that's one less thing you have to worry about. Overall, excellent bit of detailing. And the next component is probably one of the more interesting aspects on these SS models kits, and that is with the running gear. So just like with the Independent, the running gear on this model here is a single printing. This includes both the track, the wheels, and the sprockets. This is, in my opinion, a slight double-edged sword. In a way, it cuts down on the complexity and increases the simplicity of the build tenfold. But the other drawback is it makes painting and weathering a little bit more challenging. So the time that you would save in having to paint the track and all that, or I should say time to assemble the track and the suspension and get everything fitted properly, is lost in when the time required to paint these things and paint them carefully, because trying to paint tracks when they're assembled on the suspension is always a tricky proposition. This is something that is again, I can see as a carryover from the smaller scale models. When a model is 172, this tends to be a little bit easier. It's a little tricky, but you know, it tends to be more commonly seen compared to 135s. And also the 116s do the same thing, which is a little crazy to me. But regardless, the parts look great. And honestly, this is basically what like individual Lincoln Lane tracks try to mimic, where you're supposed to build them all like this is one solid cartridge and then just, you know, slap it on the hull and call it a day. Unfortunately, it just doesn't work, and it's a crap medium. I don't care what anyone says. Yes, even in this video, I will talk trash about the dreaded individual Lincoln Lane tracks, and I will do so with a smile because those track methods are pure crap. As for the track, it is the rubber block panoramic track, and it looks great. The guide teeth look excellent. They have their fasteners integrally printed on, and everything is exactly where it needs to be. One other thing I want to mention is that on the photographs of this model on the internet, you will see that the track is much more loose with the rendering. It appears to me that whoever designed these kits here were looking at the Pilot Sherman model that was given to the Bovington Tank Museum. I believe it's called Michael, if I'm not mistaken. Regardless, if you look at that vehicle, I'll throw a picture up on the screen now, the idler is not tensioned appropriately, and because of that, we have some excessive slack on those tracks. And on the first generation of not just this kit here, but the other ones in smaller scales, and also I've seen it on the M2 and a few other vehicles with this type of setup, the track was rendered in the very loose manner, and that was something that was a bit of a worry for me. Honestly, if I saw that, I was on the fence if I would just straight up not use the tracks or remove the bogies from the track and replace it with an aftermarket source. But with the kit in hand, it appears that they remedied that and they gave the track a much more appropriate tension. This is something that's much, you know, more akin to the real one. I do like the way that they added the slight little bends in between the bogies, which again would be appropriate for this vehicle, and it looks absolutely excellent. So these tracks here are going to be used on this model, and you know, we'll see how it goes when it comes to time for painting. I will tell you this, it's going to be a hell of a lot easier than the Independent. I can tell you that. I'm painting that right now at the time I'm filming this, and well, you're just going to have to watch that video to see how exactly I pull it off. The tracks again are a left and right hand specific piece, and they look great. It's going to be fun to remove them off the sprue and get them fitted to the hull. And that is basically it. Here goes the last of the verbiage. It's nothing more than just a little sheet showing you the parts that are supplied with this kit. You'll notice that there are no instructions, Zippo, on this model whatsoever. But then again, the kit literally consists of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 parts. And if you can't figure out how 6 parts go together, you really shouldn't be building this kit to begin with, or any model for that matter. So that's all there is to mention about that. So here's the tank in the shop, and I'm now ready to actually start it. Like what I mentioned in the other SS model build that I did a little while ago, which was the Independent, I'm going to go ahead and walk through some of the deburring, because if you've never worked with this type of medium before, i.e. if you're the type of person that's just used to working with standard injection molded plastic, something like this may be a bit outside of your comfort zone, so it definitely helps to see someone else go through the motions with trying to just simply deburr something and remove it off of the sprue. Generally, when you're working on a plastic model, of course, you just use clean cut snips like this one here, and you just basically snip off 1 or 2 components, or 1 or 2 stems more or less, and then the piece can pop off and you can progress from there. For this, it's going to be a bit different. Like I stated before, we have a whole lot of little areas where the things are making contact. So to deburr, you can utilize one of 2 different ways, or I should say one of 2 different ways that I personally ran into on the other build. One is to use a pair of clean cut snips. This is something that you absolutely must have. But something else that can potentially assist in the work is some kind of an oscillating tool like my old Dremel Multimax like we have here. These are an excellent bit of tooling in order to help remove these components off of their girder type sprues. It does so in short order. It makes a hell of a lot less cleanup, i.e. dust, compared to a standard Dremel with a cutting stone, which a lot of people might default if they do not have a tool like this, because, you know, this is not exactly the type of tool that's found in most model builders' toolbox. Of course, I, do my 1/6 scale stuff and some of the 1/16, so yeah, it's something like this is actually very helpful, and by the way, I cannot recommend these enough for that application. However, for smaller 1/35 scale builds, generally you don't have this tool in your toolbox, but I do recommend getting one. They're not that expensive these days. You can pick one up from Harbor Freight. Even the lower end one that they have should be perfectly suffice for dealing with this type of a model. It's definitely a worthy investment, specifically if, you plan on doing a few of these. Even if you don't, it's a good tool to have in your toolbox regardless. Back to the model over here. These oscillating tools are fantastic because they do a great job of just snipping all of the remnants off, which will then allow you easier access to go in here with clean cut snips to do the fine close in work. You can try to do that with the clean cut snip here, but you're going to be there for a while. The oscillator definitely makes short work of that, and it really goes through the process in a much faster manner. And because this blade here, again, is with the way these things work, it'll do so in actually a fairly precise manner too, that will also cause less damage to potentially occur to the parts themselves. A hobby knife is also going to be important. I use my little miniature box cutter over here, but again, that's a common bit of tooling that most people have in their toolboxes. So I'm going to go ahead and start with the sprue removal. I'm going to start with the hull, just so I could get to some of the revision work that I am going to be making to this model, because I am a Shermanaholic after all. So here I got to plug it in first, but I think I'm just going to go ahead and just amputate it off of the pouring basin, or I should say the printing basin, in this manner. Once it's off of this platform over here, I could then go in with the clean cut snips to do the rest. So to do the cleanup, I'm going to actually start with the clean cut snips. I'm going to take care of the easily removed ones. Then once I'm done with the low-hanging fruit, so to speak, I could go in with the Multimaster to do the remainder of the cutting. Okay, I think that's all the cutting I'm going to be able to do for now. Let's go ahead and begin with the actual trim work. Oh, we have a little umbilical cord still, right there. Yep. One thing I think is pretty cool, it kind of has this, like, architectural grid, like, industrial park thing going. Looks like something, like, I'll actually, mention, if any, for a quick diorama idea, I would hold on to these, specifically if you're into building dioramas. Something like this would be perfect for, like, a factory-type scene, where, like it's Stalingrad, or something like that, or even, like, Hue, or any type of an urban factory type bombed out, setting. You could easily have like some rubble like this within some collapsed bricks, like in a bombed out factory. You have some, soldiers around, or even a buried vehicle or something like that. That's something that's potentially could be used to recycle these little shards that we have here, because, they definitely have some really interesting and cool looking truss and other type of industrial look to them. So that's something to potentially keep in mind. Once I remove a certain number of these pieces over here, the bottom plate here just peeled away. It kind of has like a onion layer type setup to it, which, was perfect for this type of thing. It just flaked away. And now this is much more easily addressed. Or I should say compared to before. It's amazing just how thick, or how, dense it is over here with all these little struts. And you do want to be careful. You do have a lot of details in here that are buried, like the little U-shackles. You can easily just like over snip that. And that would be something that's less than ideal. Okay, so the piece has been freed from its printing basin. There's a few little shards here on the inside. Any other stragglers? There we go. Okay, so it's been fred from the majority of the columns. One side effect of this type of production is that you do have a bit of a pincushion type setup that we have here, and this is something that needs to be carefully addressed by the builder and can easily be polished down because of the rest of the material. This is something you can do with some sandpaper. And, you know, if you take your time, you should be able to polish these away. But one thing you have to be aware of are, specifically on a vehicle like this, or similar, like an M3 Lee, because they do have some Lee power tanks as well, is there are a lot of rivets on the real vehicle, and you want to make sure what is a rivet and what is not a rivet. So that's something that you are going to have to pay attention to as a builder. But other than that, you know, you should be able to do the procedure just fine. So with the hull fred, I'm now going to go ahead and take care of the turret. Turret looks pretty straightforward. It's not nearly as dense compared to the rear section over there. The MP48 spring antenna base is integrally printed on, so I'm going to, and there are some columns around that. Okay, I just want to carefully remove those to protect it. It's kind of like a forest of girders. Looks like we have a little flake going on with the rear bustle here of the turret. Let's go ahead and amputate it further. Okay. So, with the piece removed, there is some slight deformation right over here on the corner. And this is something that I've seen on the other SS build that I did, where there was a wheel that had some strange flaking going on, just peeled away basically like a biscuit, best way to put it. And that's the same thing with this over here. This is going to require a little bit of body work to patch up, and this, again, is something that comes really with the territory when you're working on a kit like this, right? If you're thinking you're going to be, you know, getting a kit that's like a dragon or, you know, something, or injection molded plastic kit where, you know, you free it and you could, you know, it's going to be good to go, maybe some slight seam removal. You might want to pump your brakes. This is this is again indicative of, like I said before, with these kits really more or less replace for the old garage resin cast kits from back in the 90s. And, you know, it's the type of hand fitting, shall we say, that, you know, one would be accustomed to. But that's part of the charm when it comes to working on a vehicle like this. Like I'm going to, like I said in that video, and also like I'm probably going to be circling back to in this video, if this is something that, you know, turns you off, at the end of the day, where else are you going to find this vehicle type? You know, it's one of those, you just got to take it for what it is. If you want the juice, you got to have to be willing to do the squeeze. So, but, you know, we'll circle back on how exactly address that as the video goes on. Perfect. Okay, so the last thing to take off are the suspension sections, and this I'm just going to go straight in with the multi-master. I'm not even going to try to snip off all of these things in Sherwood Forest over here. And there we go. Multi-master again does short work of removing everything in place. One thing you do have to keep aware of is that when you're cutting these, you want to be really careful not to damage the end connectors. As you can see the way the stems are, they're basically connected to each of the track pins that are on the teeth. But more importantly, you want to be careful not to accidentally cut the bottom portion here of the bogey housing. So when you're cutting, as you can see for the top portion, I just stayed close, but then when I wanted to remove it further, I just went and cut the stems off from the very bottom portion of the plate over here. Piece comes off in one little section. It's not warped or anything like that. Let's see if I can go ahead and actually dry fit it in place. Remember, on the other one, I needed to do a little bit of hand fitting, and that may more or less be true for this one here. Tolerances are very, very tight, so yeah, some hand fitting is going to be required on that, but, you know, it's nothing that's out of the ordinary. But yeah, okay, so from here, I'm going to go ahead and do the next one. Same thing, I'm going to start with removing the cage. Once the outer cage is removed, I can then go at it and, you know, get to the meat and potatoes of it. And after about 30, 35 or so minutes, here's the model now, essentially built. Like with many of the other, or I should say just like with the other SS model tank that I did before, they go together pretty quick because there's really not a whole lot of parts to them. So once you're done with the cleanup, you know, everything just plugs together. So on the cleanup, I'm still finishing up this area here of the rear hull. It's actually pretty tricky on this one, getting in here to these tight recesses. I got to use some sandpaper, and I'm going to be going in there with the plier trick, where I take a little piece of sandpaper, and I clinch it in a plier, and I just, you know, go carefully and surgically into a few areas until everything is polished away, but the material polishes away very, very easily. Another thing to mention was with that shift that I had before on the hull sections, where there was that area where it stood up slightly pronounced on this side compared to the remainder of the model. Well, I went ahead and polished that down as well. Again, it polished away really, really quickly with just a little bit of hand sanding. This was done to the appropriate locations, leaving for the appearance that we have here. There's going to be a bunch more modifications added. Like, for instance, I am going to amputate this handle over here and replace it with a brand new one made out of metal. It has to be done to both sides because this one here is broken off, like I may have mentioned earlier. There are a few more little struts I need to snip away. But that's really all there is to that. On the suspension, as you can see, I was able to get them fitted in place. One thing that I did was I just opened up the tolerances on the plug sections. With the way the kit is designed, we have these hex sections that are integrally printed on, and then there's a corresponding section found on the areas and should theoretically plug in nice and easily. But with tolerances being what they are very, very snug. So in order to let the pieces fit in better, I just hog them out with a router bit that I have right over here. This is a size that I've mentioned on a few other videos, and I even have the vendor listed in the video description below. I just went ahead and just drilled out the areas slightly, removing just the right amount of material. Then once that was done, the piece just slides on in place without any sort of other complications. There are some sprue sections that need to be polished away. Sandpaper, again, makes short work of it. On the turret, this here was also fairly snug with its fitting, so I went here with a router bit and I removed just a little bit amount of material in order to open it up. It's not symmetrical, as you can see here. This was as per the printing, but you know, it's on the underside, so it's not a problem. The tar fits on very, very loose on this one. This may tighten up once it gets layers of paint and varnish. Or on this one here, I might do some kind of a securing system. That remains to be seen. On a similar note, here we have the Commander's cupola mini turret. This just drops directly into place. Again, fairly loose, but again, this is something that will tighten up with paint. On this one, the tolerances were extremely tight originally, so much so that it didn't really fit on, and if this is the case, do not just try to, you know, force it in. You're just going to cause the thing to break. And again, with the router bit over here, I went ahead and just removed a little bit of material, allowing for the piece to plug in place. So that's it for the out-of-the-box portion. Now it's time to have fun. Oh, before I do that, though, here goes the main 75 removed from the sprue. Again, tolerances were tight over here. Fortunately, I removed a little too much material than I really wanted to. Nothing that's a concern. It's just that I can't just, you know, plug the piece in for looks at this point here. This is something that's going to be done after the turret goes through some modifications. So with that out of the way, it's now time to go over what I am going to be modifying on this piece. And I'm going to be showing this obviously more depth once the model is fully completed. But the one thing that is definitely staring at me on the turret is with the geometry that we have right here on the front section. I may mention this earlier, but this is far too sharp for a Sherman tank. You know, on the Shermans, these are very rounded, and this is something that is going to be taken care of momentarily. Fortunately, it's really easy to take care of, just some sandpaper, a few minutes of that, and this should be good to go. I'm not sure about the T6, but I know for a fact that on the standard Sherman turret, there is that lip that comes out of this section over here with that notch in it. That is absent on this model, and honestly, if I was to say, this one here really does look like a model that was designed to be small scale, either 172 or 148, and then just bumped up to 135, and there are just some things indicative of the way the model is designed that lends itself to that. Like, for instance, on the pepper pot exhaust, how they are integrally printed to the hull over there. That's something generally needed for something of a much substantially smaller size compared to something in 135. So little things like that definitely tend to stick out at me. But regardless, it should still be for a pleasant build, either way. Unsure if I'm going to fabricate that section. I may actually pull it off. It doesn't seem like it's something that's too hard to fabricate. I could just trace the turret lip from a 135 that I have, make it out of some plastic and glue it on. We'll see how that works as the build continues. But that's basically, excuse me, that's basically what we have here in a nutshell. And there are going to be several other little tweaks and modifications and improvements I'm going to be making to this build, but all that's going to be discussed in the next leg of the video. Let me go ahead and actually get to all these modifications that I'm going to be showing. Yeah, it happened again. I just can't refrain myself. Seriously, when it comes to building Shermans, I'm like a little dog chasing a car. I don't know why I do it. I'm just compelled. I have to do it, no matter what. And that's exactly what happened here. This model at this point now is fully assembled, and at this point it's actually ready to slide off into paint and then completion. But before I went ahead and got it to that point, I went ahead and gave it some extra upgrades, as you could probably see from the condition that we have here. Unlike the Independent, where that one was literally just OOB, I didn't really do anything outside of assembling it and painting it. This one here, nah, I went ahead and added some extra fittings to it. And it always starts off the same way. Oh, I'm just going to add this and that. Next thing you know, it's a blown project. But this project was a very fast one at that, and that also lends itself to the basic kit itself. Okay, so the model now has been modified from the kit original, and I'm filming it at this point here because, like I generally mention in these videos, this is really the best time to really appreciate the stuff, as opposed to once everything is built and completed. Although it looks fantastic in its final form, you really get to appreciate the extra work that went to it at this point here. So before it slides off in the paint, I might as well just go ahead and describe some of the extra fittings that were added to the build. To start with, I just want to say that right now, even though the model looks like it's fully assembled, it's really not. Right now, the suspension is held on temporarily, and as you can see, it's fully removable. This is done for the same reason that I mentioned in the Independent video, where I like to paint and weather the suspension sections off of the model, paint them thoroughly, and then fit them on after all that is completed, because this allows you to thoroughly paint all of the recesses, and it also allows you to do this in an easier manner. When the suspension's fitted to the model, you have a lot of nooks and crannies over here, and trying to get paint into these areas here is almost impossible. This is something that I've seen a lot of people on YouTube do. They just, they build the model and paint it basically in this type of condition, and that is just beyond laughable, because you will have areas that paint will just not get to. And even though you say, oh, you can't see it, yeah, you kind of do. It's one of those things where if you hold the model at a certain angle, boom, you're going to see the basic color popping out. So as a rule of thumb, always paint your suspension off of the build, and you assemble it at the very tail end, regardless of the suspension type. Be it a Sherman, Tiger, also regardless of the track medium, be it workable track link, single piece vinyl, or God forbid if you unironically use the individual link and length for reasons that escape me, all of those should be done separately. So as you can see, the suspension is currently a separate piece. Going back to the suspension, this is something I do want to mention. It's actually a ding on the kit. The suspension here is technically inaccurate for this vehicle. The suspension that we have here is from the M2 medium tank. And the reason why this is the case is because, well, SS Models produces an M2 and an M2A1, both really cool kits. I wouldn't mind picking them up in the near future, hint, hint. But regardless, the M2 suspension is very similar visually to the one found on the M3 and the M4. The difference, though, is with the subtle details you find on the sprocket, on the suspension, but most importantly on the track. See, the track, although design-wise is identical to the ones found on the later vehicles, it is narrower compared to the ones found on the M3 and the M4. Why this is relevant is because when you fit the track to the tank, it looks like it fits on very well, and it does. However, if you see the track on this side, you'll notice that it's slightly thinner than it really should be. On a standard Sherman tank, the sprocket here should come very close up against the final drive, and it fills in this area quite well. On the SS Model T6 over here, you're going to have a bit of an extra gap here that's found in this area. This is something that if someone's not in the know, you're going to be looking at that and you're going to be confused. But this is something to pay attention to. For this build here, the suspension, in my opinion, it works just fine. It's, you know, more than suffice for this build, so I'm not swapping it out. However, I do want to mention that if you are someone who is looking to make a super accurate rendition of the T6, perhaps this is something to look into. There are workable, obviously there's workable track links for this Printed track out there from Mini Art. I would recommend that one. But as for the M3 Elite suspension, they're not really as common as, say, suspensions for M4 Shermans on the aftermarket scene. So this is something that you're probably going to have to scavenge from another kit, which is something I really don't like to do. I hate when people do that stuff. You know, I'm more of a, you know, build what's in the box type guy. But regardless, there are also people out there on eBay that sell just the sprues of various kits out there, and you can probably pick up an M3 Lee suspension in that manner. And I believe the ones that I've seen on the market are from Mini Art. So, you know, you might, which is great because the Mini Art track will work perfectly with it and will actually flesh out quite nicely. So that's something to keep in mind. So aside from the track sections, this leads us to the hull. So I'm going to quickly take the turret off and I'll touch upon this little equipment momentarily. But I went ahead and made some modifications to the hull, as one can see. The very first thing I did was the cast texturing. Of course, you know, this vehicle being an all-cast type unit, the cast texturing is something that's absent on the 3D print, so I went ahead and added my usual format with the use of red putty. As for how this is applied, well, I have a few tutorials on the channel where I go ahead and show the technique in more depth, and one of the tutorials can be found in the link listed below in the video description. The texturing was done to the entire upper hull, as you can see. And it really is going to give the model a nice little extra kick of detailing once everything is fully painted. For the transmission cover, I also went ahead and added some cast texturing as well as to the hatches over here, but it's done with a slightly different method. Instead of the red putty technique I use here, for the transmission, I utilize the Tamiya pavement paint, where if I have some here, where is it? One moment. This stuff right here. This is basically used for dioramas, and you know, you get to paint it on a surface and it looks like pavement. It's a texture type paint, and it's applied with the brush, and it actually does a pretty good job with adding some very fine cast texturing. It's another technique that I utilize depending on the situation. The reason why I went with this technique is because I wanted there to be a differentiation between the two surfaces, and that's why I went with the other one. Also, with this one here, with the details molded in, the red putty can potentially harm these details over here, so this stuff applies much thinner, and it still gives you the texturing without causing too much collateral damage. From the texturing takes to the remainder of the lower hull mods, which would include the idler mount as well as the final drive. You'll see that the final drives are different compared to the stock original, and the reason why I did this was because, again, of the tracks that I mentioned before. When you mount the unit on, again, you will have a gap in this section over here, and you will see the original stem that we have protruding from the side, and in my opinion, again, it could potentially hurt the look. So as a quick why not bit of detailing, I decided to replace the original final drive with a spare one that I have here in the stash. The final drive detailing isn't technically printed on, but it's very, very, very simplistic. Again, like I mentioned before, this is indicative of something from a smaller scale, namely, again, 172 or 148. Same is also going to be true for the idler mount. Although those details are perfectly suffice for something in that smaller range, when you go up in scale, it tends to be a little bit softer in its detailing. So there was absolutely nothing there besides just the shape of the final drive. In order to enhance it, I first amputated the original final drive with a dremel with a high-speed removal bit, making sure I removed it in a nice flat manner. And then I went ahead and found in my spare parts bin some spare Dragon Sherman final drives and idler mounts that were just languishing away. I removed them off of the sprue, and I made some slight modifications to them to slip them over the kit original printed shaft. Once the hole was drilled, or expanded, I should say, the final drive slips right over the unit, like it does on a Tamiya, for instance, and then I was able to secure it in place. But before I did that, I went ahead and took some careful measurements here of the stem, and I cut it to the appropriate length so that now when the track is secured in place, it bottoms out absolutely perfectly, and you have some decent detailing present as opposed to the thin hex shaft that was present on the original printing. Same is also true on the opposite side. On a similar note, the same thing was done for the same reasons here on the rear idler mounts. As a quick comparison, let me go ahead and throw up a picture of the idler mount in its stock form. So as you can see, it basically has the generic shape of one. For a smaller scale build, pretty suffice, but again, 135, we could do it a little bit better. So what I went ahead and did was with the Dremel, I amputated the blister found in this section over here. With the high-speed removal bit, I was able to carefully make everything nice and flat. Once that material was removed, I snipped this section here off of the spare sprue, marked the area that needs to be removed, cut that away, and then this just slips on this area here without any problems. Of course, it was also done on the opposite side. With the track mounted in place, you now get better detailing with the idler mount detailing now. One, it's way more visible than before, and also you have the appropriate detailing of the rigidity straps as well as the mounting fasteners that are absent on the original tooling. Moving further back takes us to another bit of detailing that was absent on the stock tooling, but was one that I went ahead and quickly added, and that can be seen right here between the two exhaust manifolds. The T6 was again heavily influenced from the M3, or specifically the M3A1, and on both of those vehicles, in the back section over here, even with the pepper pot exhaust, you would have this section that's open for ventilation for the engine compartment. And this detailing is completely absent on the SS model. In order to add it, it was simply done. I took some photo etch mesh, cut it to shape, and just glued it in this section over here. Once painted and weathered, it's really going to enhance this section immensely. Also, as a why not bit of detailing, on the bottom section here of the idler mounts, I cut the slit into these two sections here with the Multimaster. As again, on all of these patterns of vehicle, the way the idler mounts are designed, they are molded in cast metal with a slit found in these sections, and this allows these three fasteners to clamp onto the idler shaft here, and that's how you adjust your track tension. Those little slits are absent on the stock tooling. Why not bit of detailing? I simply just cut it with the Multimaster, and it improves the model immensely. Moving up, you can see some of the other details. So first I added the engine starter crank section right over there. This is absent on the original kit. This was added with a Dremel with two very small Dremel bits. I was able to cut that little unique shape into the 3D printed resin with those bits of equipment. Then this takes us to the taillights. Taillights are the stock ones. However, the kit one does have an error. They rendered the taillight with like the way you see it on a car, where it's just a simple bulb. However, on the T6 is just like every other American vehicle where it had the cat's eye lenses. And so the cat's eye lenses I went ahead and added. Fortunately, I had a mold on hand for, vehicles that are either missing taillights or, could use an upgrade like the ones here. So I casted the new replacements out of resin. And I just simply cut the faces off and glued them onto the main bases because the bases were actually pretty good. One thing to point out, though, that's interesting about the T6 is that the taillights are on upside down. It's a little strange. If anyone knows a thing or two about US military vehicles, you know that the cat's eye section is on the top and the white light is on the bottom. And that is absolutely true, but in this one here, that's not the case. And in case anyone thinks I'm totally crazy and losing my mind, well, here goes a picture of the real T6 medium tank, and as you can see, the taillights are fitted upside down. I know, your guess is as good as mine, but regardless, it's on the real one, ergo, it's going to be on my model here. Bouncing to the front takes us to some other details. So this brings us to the tin work. The tin work did receive some modifications, as again, this is something that was indicative of something designed for a smaller scale. The tin work was, in my opinion, a bit on the thicker and chunkier end. Generally, you want this on something smaller scale because it makes it easier to manufacture, but in 135, it tends to lend itself for, you know, something that can hurt the look. So what I did was, with a high-speed removal bit, I actually just carved away carefully the material till I was at the appropriate thickness, and then I was able to progress from there. On the front portions, you'll see that I actually had to fabricate the two down sections of the tin work. On the kit, for some reason, it's actually missing these sections, and something that's a bit odd that it's missing, but regardless, it was easy to fabricate. I just took some paper, drew a template, and then I was able to transfer that to some thin aluminum from a soda can, specifically. Cut it to shape, glue it in place, and then everything was blended in. I added the fender supports out of the same type of aluminum, and it's done in the same manner as I mentioned on all my Sherman videos. While on the topic of the aluminum, you can see I added the section right over here on these vehicles that would eventually become the M4A1. You would have this little down section found on the leading edge here of the tin work, and this was fabricated out of just, again, some soda can aluminum, bent to shape, or I should say just cut to shape and then glued in place. This is much better replicating the appropriate shape of the tin work compared to the big chunky nature that it had in the original print. Once added in place, and specifically once it's painted and weathered, it's really going to look great. Carrying on takes to the headlights. Headlights, I went ahead and added the power cable detailing right over here. It's made out of some thin floor wire, bent to shape, drilled into sections on the hull, and fitted in place. Same was also done on the reverse side, and will also look really good once everything is painted. The next modification is to the siren. On many early production versions of the Sherman, the siren would be kept on the tin work like you see here, and it would be the football pattern one, generally speaking, specifically from this era. The kit does have the siren printed on, however, it is missing the little intricate V embossed stamp pattern that we have here on the face. The kit siren is just a amorphous shape, and again is something that you would expect to see on something of a smaller scale. 135, I went ahead and wanted to address that. So what I did was I actually have a rubber mold on hand for sirens, again, in case, just like with the taillights, in case I need it. So what I did was I just casted the face section, and I just prepped the area by polishing down the front portion of the siren with a needle file. Because it's, you know, has the basic shape of the early siren, it's rounded, much along the lines of like an old car. So, you know, it's not a good surface to secure the new one to. I flattened it off with the needle file, and then I was able to glue the new resin one in place, giving you for the look that we have here. Also in this area, you can see the grab handles that have been added. Again, one of them was broken, so I had to amputate the other one, just so that when I add the new one in place, it has some good continuity. The locations were the exact locations were the original ones. I just simply drilled them out with a pin vise, allowing for the piece to drop in the exact same area. And I also, while on this note, drilled a smaller hole in this section over here, which is for an antenna base, namely an MP48 or an MP37. Fortunately, I don't have either my spare bin at the moment, so I'm just going to leave it with the antenna removed, but at least you have the mounting hole in place. Moving backward takes us to the tow cable. And what's interesting is that the kit does have the tow cable and connectors integrally printed on. However, they did not integrally print on the cable, which is kind of baffling because they went ahead and printed on the majority of the tools, but the cable they just left off. So what I did was I just simply had to fabricate the rest of the cable. I think the kit is actually designed for this type of procedure to be done because the cable sections are printed drilled out, so it is, you know, basically ready to go for you to glue the string in like I did over here. The string is just spare model tow cable string that I have in my spare bin. If you build as many tanks as I do, you tend to accumulate quite a bit of this nylon string on hand, so, you know, it was good to finally use it for something. The string was added, I did the general shape, and then it was tack glued in place with some thin super glue. Once the glue set, I went ahead and added the supports that we have over here. These were fabricated out of thin pieces of soda can aluminum, bent to shape, glued in place, thus completing the necessary detailing. One thing about this model is that you'll notice that all the tools are integrally printed on. Generally, this is something that I don't necessarily like. If anyone watches my builds, you'll know that I tend to install my tools at the very tail end of the build, and it allows you to thoroughly paint them and weather them thoroughly without having any potential hiccups of bleeding or other types of potential problems. However, I have done several builds in the past where I was able to navigate the waters appropriately and thoroughly and paint everything while secured to the model. It's not exactly something I prefer, but if push comes to shove, you know, I can actually pull it off. And the tow cable here is is an example of that. Same is also true for the pickaxe. The pickaxe here is a spare one I had in my spare bin. I believe it's a Dragon also. And there is a pickaxe found in this section over here. Oddly enough, it's absent on the printing. And again, if anyone looks at the real T6, I'll throw a picture up right here on screen. You'll see that the pickaxe handle, or I should say the pickaxe head, is right there strapped to this section. So I just simply went ahead and mounted it. While you're looking at the image, in addition to the pickaxe, I also need to go ahead and fabricate something for the air intake. The air intake on the T6 is basically the exact same engine deck found on the M3A1, so it would have some mesh work in this section over here. With the way the kit is designed, we do have some slat detailing, but no mesh work. So I went ahead and fabricated the mesh work out against some photo etch mesh. Cut it to shape, and this will be fitted in place momentarily. I always like to add my photo etch mesh after the model is thoroughly painted, weathered, and varnished. This is the best way to help prevent any sort of problems with the holes plugging up, as this is something that can easily happen with photo etch mesh, and it's always something that really hurts the look of the build. So this is something I'm going to be adding on at the very tail end. Regardless, you can see just how much more enhanced the PE gives the model overall. And this takes us to the turret. So, as I mentioned before, the turret was very, very loose fitting on this model. So in order to do something about that, I went ahead and designed a magnet lock system. To do this, I took some scrap resin stock that I had floating around. I milled it, machined it to the rectangular shape here. I drilled a hole dead center, and I fit on a permanent magnet. On the turret itself, luckily with the way the turret is printed, it is a solid printing, so there's plenty of material here to mess with. I went ahead and drilled a small hole into the center. I added another little magnet. However, in testing, it was still too weak, so to enhance it, I added the steel plate that we have right here. This is simply just glued to the inside, and with the steel plate in its place, the turret secures on in place, and as you can see, it holds it on very, very well. Nice little jerk of the wrist over there, and the turret will slide off, but that's okay. Once some extra layers of paint get built up, it's really going to do a great job with keeping this thing in its place where it needs to be. Also, you can see I did a similar technique here to the Commander's cupola. The stem I found to be just slightly too long, where the cupola sits on, but it sticks up just slightly, like less than a millimeter or so. So in order to make it flush fitting, I went ahead and removed a little bit of material. On the cupola itself, you see this ring here? This ring is actually integrally casted onto the Sherman turret, and the same ring is actually found on all of the turret castings that came after this. And as a quick trivia, this ring here is actually what the standard cupola is secured to, both the dual and the single piece. But regardless, needless to say, there should be any gap over here. So I went ahead and shortened the stem here, drilled a hole in the center, added a permanent magnet, glued a piece of sheet metal on the inside, and huzzah, I now have the turret clip-on in place, or the cupola clip-on in place. This allows me to have the flexibility of having a turret that's now fully positionable, and I can position the model in a multitude of different ways, and it really lends itself for, some nice little, display purposes. So outside of this section here, you can see that the rear bustle has been completely repaired. This was just done with some body work. Red putty was added to this section, quite a bit of it. Wait for the stuff to fully set. Once done, I just polish it out with some sandpaper, leaving for the look that we have here, and then everything is blended in with the cast texturing, as you can see. On the front portion of the turret, we have the mantlet. The mantlet did receive some extra cast texturing, again with the same texture paint that I mentioned before, and you can see I added the holes here for the securing fasteners, and this is a ding found on the kit. There are no fasteners found on the integral printing, for reasons that are a bit confusing, because there are lots of pictures of the real T6, and you can actually get a good count of the fasteners. In fact, the ones on this model here are hand-counted and are in the appropriate locations as they should be on the real one. The only T6 that does not have any fasteners found on the mantlet was the wooden mock-up, which I'll go ahead and throw a picture up over here so you get an idea of what I'm referring to. However, the actual T6, which again, I'll throw a real picture of the last noted picture of the actual vehicle, you can see the fasteners clear as day. And this brings us to the very last modification made to the turret, and that is the lip that we have right here. As I mentioned before, the lip was absent, so I went ahead and fabricated it out of some sheet styrene. styrene was added, trimmed to shape, and I also had that little notch cut out right here, which again on the real one it's for use to rotate the turret and get access to the slot screw fasteners that keep the turret ring in place. So with that added, the turret is now fully completed. At this point here, you know all of the mods that I made to this model, why I made them to the model, so let's go ahead and get this thing painted and completed. And as the build progresses, here we have the model coming to the end of its production, or I should say getting to the end of its paint work. At this point here, the model is fully painted and weathered, and it's about to slide off into varnishing, but I do need to do some things like painting the tools and a few other small little amenities like that prior to the thing getting its varnish coat. Regardless, I want to mention this at this time because you really get a good chance to appreciate this now as opposed to after the model's fully completed. And that is specifically in regards to the tracks. So as I mentioned before and as we saw earlier, the tracks are a single printing and all the details are pre-found on the printing, and then you just simply install it to the model. However, before you do that, you really need to pre-paint everything off of the model. If you install these onto the model before everything's painted, good luck trying to get the things properly and thoroughly painted. It's just not gonna happen. It always blows my mind whenever I see a lot of people on YouTube doing that, because I know, you know, all too well, you're gonna be missing some spots. So, with the units not glued onto the model, this gives you the best opportunity to thoroughly coat every single location on the area, on both the hull as well as on the suspension itself with the paint, and you get to get everything thoroughly painted and weathered with a much easier done manner. So here you get to see the track section right here. The unit is painted with the same exact paints as I generally mention in these videos. The base coat obviously is the same as this one. I'll touch upon that later as the video goes on. But the tracks themselves were first, well, the whole model was spray painted with flat black spray paint, and then I carefully went and painted everything by hand. So all the bogies are painted by hand, and what made the job a little bit trickier, besides everything being fully assembled, was the fact that the tires on this one do not have a rim, so I had to carefully paint the rims on by hand on this example here, and that was done to both sides on both of the left and right hand sections. Other than that, the paintwork went by pretty quickly. Once you get the paint onto the bogies, and once the thing sets, you can then progress further. But also, you need to paint the scratch, or I should say the steel areas, which are polished on these Sherman and Lee-based vehicles, which would be the rear idler wheel over here. These are steel rimmed, they are not rubber rimmed. I always mention that in these videos for good reasons. A lot of people don't understand this concept, and they either paint it with the base coat or they paint them black, neither of which are acceptable, specifically if you're making the thing look like it's been driven a little bit. These things wear out very, very quickly. So aside from the paint being not found in this area over here, you will also not find it on the return rollers that we find here on the top. This again is all carefully hand painted. The teeth, I went ahead and painted them as well. These are painted with Tamiya olive drab, as I generally like to mention on these Sherman builds. It gives them a nice little bit of extra color contrast, and it always ends up looking really good once everything is done. Again, carefully painted. You have to paint the insides as well as the outsides. That's the biggest trick to make sure you don't have any, miss swipes with the brush, or most importantly, the thickness on the paints have to be at the proper consistency. As I frequently mention, too thin, runs all over the place, too thick, and it looks like clunk. So you have to have that nice sweet spot in the middle. The dry brushing was done on the surface, give it that distressed steel look, which would be common for these teeth, specifically after things have been driven for a little bit. That's basically all there is to mention. But again, I just wanted to mention that obviously if you have the thing off of the model like this, you could thoroughly paint everything because you have full access to all the surfaces. The tricky part is trying to get into the sprocket over here with the primer and also with the base coat. That again was done with a paintbrush, and you will also run into tricky areas underneath the spots and basically all the nooks and crannies. And these are always a bit problematic to paint on these vehicles, but specifically true in this type of format. But you know, if you have a good paintbrush and a good steady hand as well as good mixed paints, you should be able to make do just fine. So from here, these are now going to be glued to the model because there's no point having them run around loose anymore. It's now time for me to install them in place and then continue from there. Unlike my tanks with the single piece vinyl tracks, these ones here, because they are integrally printed on, they will have absolutely zero effect, or have, I should say, the varnish should have zero effect on them. So painting, or I should say varnishing them while secured in place, it's definitely the way to go for this type of application. Single piece vinyl, I tend not to do that, just I don't want to cause any potential problems with the vinyl having a negative reaction with the varnish, which has not happened so far, but you know, I like to play it safe on this one, specifically on tanks with vinyl tracks. Regardless, this one here, I could continue further, so let's go ahead and I'll catch back to you once this thing is fully completed. And once the model is fully completed, you really get to appreciate all of that hard work in its final form. As I already alluded to earlier in the video, this is the portion of the build that is really the bulk of the work. This requires the most amount of precision in terms of carefully removing everything off the sprue, making sure you don't break anything accidentally, making sure everything fits on in its appropriate location, and most importantly, making sure everything is thoroughly painted and weathered. With the format that I showed in this video, you will have paint on every single location, and you will not leave anything up to chance by having something left exposed, which can potentially turn around and bite you if you hold a model in a certain light. If you follow this format that I mentioned before, it's just going to yield for much better results, and it's going to yield for a build that is far more complete and one that is far more polished. Also, as I mentioned earlier, one of the biggest things that this kit does have is that the suspension is lifted from the M2 medium tank, which of course is slightly narrower compared to the suspension and track found on the M3 and of course later the M4. However, with the final drive details fitted in place, the vehicle tends to flesh out quite nicely, and it's one of those things that unless you're in the know, you're not really going to know and or notice when you have this model and you build it up with the out-of-the-box components. However, again, just throwing this out there to anyone who is a completist and who is a rivet counting snob, if that's you, perhaps you may want to go ahead and revise the suspension by replacing it with some kind of an aftermarket source of one flavor or another. But again, that's best left up to the discretion of the builder at hand. For me, on my build over here, I just rolled with the stock one for the end results that you see presently. Hopping to the rear, the model takes to the rear section details, and as you can see, everything fleshed out quite nicely. The pepper pots were painted and weathered to the following format. This was all done with the airbrush and with my usual weathering techniques. Also on this section over here, you get to see that mesh work that I was mentioning earlier, and once it's fitted in place, it really does flesh out the model, giving it for a more complete appearance. Also in this section, you can see the starter crank little slot over here in its final format, again just giving the build just more added accuracy. And while also on this location, you get to see the taillights. Note they do not have any brush guards on them. This is something that would progress and be fitted later on. Also, again, the orientation. It's unique that the taillights are actually mounted on upside down, which is very different compared to basically every other US military vehicle I've ever built and or come across, where generally speaking, this goes from World War II up until the present day, the cat's eyes are always on the top and the square light is always on the bottom. However, on the T6 here, that's simply not the case. As for the paintwork, again, done in my usual format. The cat's eye here on the left-hand side is painted in red. The little square is painted in silver. And on the reverse side, we have the cat's eye just painted in black because, again, this would be a blackout light. Again, this is one of those quirks found on the T6, and if you're working on a T6 of whatever flavor or another, be sure to make sure that the taillights are mounted on in the appropriately wrong way. Best way to put it. Pivoting back to the front takes to the transmission cover, and with the model in its final form, you really get to see and appreciate all that added cast texturing really coming out. So right here you can see on the surface that cast texturing, which is so subtle, but it really just makes the model look 10 times more enhanced compared to the way it was originally. It's just jumping out at you. Also on this section over here, we have the little drainage plugs found on the blisters here on the front transmission cover. These are, again, a common bit of detailing found on all Sherman lead pattern vehicles, specifically the ones with the 3-piece transmission cover. And the plugs themselves are integrally printed on this kit, and all you gotta do as the builder is simply paint them. A little swipe of gloss red paint was all that was required in order to get the piece to the condition that you see here. These Zerk fittings are always a fantastic way to make the model look that much more complete, and also gives it just so much extra little bit of color and detail fidelity. You just can't go wrong, and in most cases, these things are integrally molded on, regardless of the kit in question. If it has the pieces molded on, just a simple swipe of the paintbrush is all you gotta do to give that build just that little extra tip to make it look so much better. Also in this section here, you get to see the headlights as well as the scratch build power cables that I mentioned before. Same is also true here on the siren, and also with the face detailing found on the siren. Of course, all these details help enhance the model, making it look just that much more complete. And also in this section here is a noteworthy mention. We have here the early Browning 1919s with the slot shroud. Just some simple weathering and dry brushing was all that was done to the kit ones in order to make them into the appearance that you see here. Moving up takes to the bow hatch area, and on this kit here we have the driver's periscope rendered in the open position. So like I always do on my builds on all periscopes, I paint them with a little swipe of gloss black. Some people out there like to use either a blue or some other type of color, like silver. In my opinion, silver is probably the worst way to go. Blue is debatable on the color of the prism and also on the reflection of the outside environment. However, from what I've seen from my personal experience with working with these things and seeing them up close and crawling around them, they tend to have a black nature, specifically when the model's all buttoned up. So that's why in my builds I like to use gloss black for all my prisms and periscopes. The way it's done is just a simple swipe of gloss black paint with a paintbrush and you're good to go. Same was also done here for the bow MG radio operator section. And it's just a simple way to just, again, make the build look all that much more complete. So many builds out there, a lot of times people build these things and they forget to do the simple stuff like the Zerk fittings or the periscopes, and it's a way to just kneecap your build. By, again, just simply just painting what the kit already gives you, it just further enhances it and just makes it look that much more complete. Carrying along brings us back to the rear section. Now we're at the engine deck. So as I mentioned before, all of the tools were either integrally printed onto the model or were just fully fleshed out with some of the extra ones that I added that I mentioned before, namely the pickaxe as well as also the tow cable and also the tow cable mounts. Well, after the paintwork, I went ahead and completed the tool paintwork, and this is something that can be done, but you have to be really, really careful, and you have to have your ducks all lined up in a row in order to get the things properly painted without there being any sort of problems. So one common problem that painting tools on the model like this has is that the paint needs to be at the perfect consistency, and also your paintbrush needs to be brand new or one that is of really good quality. So on the paint, you want to have it at the perfect consistency. Too runny and it makes a mess, too thick and it's too chunky. For the paintbrush, again, you want to have something that is really, really fine, really, really precise, and is not fraying. If you're one of those people that have a paintbrush out there and you've used it forever and the end tends to look more like a house broom more than a paintbrush, this is not going to be the application for you. And you're just going to really have some really bad results. By going with a fresh paintbrush and having your paint ready to go, this will be basically what you can expect. So all of the handles were painted to look like wood. I believe I used Tamiya Hull Red for my wooden handles. The metal bits are painted just in flat black, and I also did a little bit of dry brushing to get the distressed look that you see here on all of the black metal surfaces. The tow cable was probably one of the more trickier things to paint because, again, of the nature of the nylon string. When I glued it on in place, the thin super glue went in and it actually solidified everything, which does alleviate a lot of problems. If anyone tries to paint string that has not been treated, well, eventually, or what does happen is that the string tends to fuzz up, best way to describe it. And on this one here, that didn't happen because the string was coated with thin super glue. It transforms the string into plastic and solidifies it in the position that we see here. But the thin super glue does not go ahead and clog up any of the thread weave that we have here, which is what you want for a tow cable. After everything was painted with the base coat, I went ahead here with a paintbrush again, carefully painted everything the way you see, and also then hit it with the dry brush for the end results. For the The tow cable eyes, I painted them in olive drab, as this is typically what is seen on these military vehicles. All of the straps that are not part of the tank, i.e. the metal hooks and clips, were painted to look like khaki material, as khaki straps are used to secure tools in place on American AFV, specifically the World War II ones. Also, this is something that tends to be forgotten about on a lot of builds out there, and again, if you're building one of these builds, be sure to paint the straps. The straps on these American World War II vehicles can be either khaki, leather belts, or also green webbing. There's a few different options to go with, and as for the build that you're working on and the area that you're working on, also depends on the color. For this one here, I went with the khaki color because of the early nature of this vehicle, but leather would also have worked well too. The reason why I didn't go with the leather is because of the red that I used for the handles on the wooden sections. Because it would have been brown on brown, it just would have not really came out that well in my opinion. So that's why I rolled with the khaki, because it's a nice neutral color and it sticks out from the rest of the paintwork, including the tank's base coat. Also on this rear section, you get to see the other photo etch that I fabricated before, fitted in place. Again, just completing the model. Of course, all of the fuel filler caps have their sweat type weathering effects. This is something that I typically do, of course, on these builds. And this vehicle here being what eventually would become the M4A1, the fuel would be in these two sections over here and would be gasoline. This one here is for the Little Joe auxiliary generator and uses a pre-mix type fuel. And these two units over here, if I'm not mistaken, are for the radiator, and so you're not going to have any sweating effects on them. Briefly moving to the side, I love these side doors here on the T6. It's that perfect appendix from the M3 Lee, and the way the kit is rendered, it's just absolutely perfect. Also, as we mentioned before, the handles were replaced with metal ones, as one of them was broken, and since I had one broken one, I might as well replace both of them just to keep the continuity, which you can see right here. Also, back to the cast texturing, again, you can see how much character it gives the model as opposed to leaving everything smooth with the way the thing was originally printed. Same, of course, is going to be true, and it's going to apply for the turret as well. And this brings us to the turret. Perfect segue. So, all of the periscopes and prisms, as I mentioned before, were painted gloss black, and on the T6 here, this is going to be true for the M3 Lee type hatches found on the side portion over here of this portion of the turret, as well as also on what would eventually become the shell ejection port on the opposite side. You can also see where you can see that's the idea where the bodywork was done on the rear bustle over here in order to fix that misprint section on where it was dented on the rear bustle. Came out absolutely perfect and blends in without anyone batting an eye. Those fastener locations also came out pretty well. They really get highlighted quite nicely with the Tamiya black panel line accent. And also the gunner scope right over there came out equally as well with the use of the black paint. Gloss black specifically. I also love how the double counterweights came out on the barrel section. The way the kit was rendered, it did a really nice job with that. And I just had to just highlight what the kit gave me with a little swipe of Tamiya panel line accent. But more on that to come. On the rear portion here, takes us to the MP48 antenna base. And like I always mention in these videos, this is a great way to add so much character and color to your American AFV builds. The base itself was decently rendered with the way the kit was designed, and the base itself is painted first with Tamiya olive drab with a paintbrush. The insulator, which again so many people tend to miss, was painted with Tamiya hull red with a little swipe of Tamiya clear gloss for that nice little glaze sheen. And then the wire was just floor wire added in place. The piece was printed somewhat hollow, so the antenna wire just plugs directly in. For the wire itself, it's painted in black, and as I always mention in these American tank videos, specifically the World War II ones, on the real units there would be a knurled connector on the bottom as well as on the top, and this is so you could appropriately plug the unit into the antenna base, and also you can add extenders to it if necessary. The knurled bases are actually color coded, and from the examples I've personally seen in person, the bottom portion here that connects to the MP48 is blue, while the portion on the top is red. There are lots of variants out there when it comes to these antennas, and if you want to do so, you can do some research online. However, from the several real units I've seen preserved in museums, as well as also on real military vehicles, they tend to be in the following format. As for rendering out the knurled pieces, in 135 it's far too tricky to do with adding some kind of a piece of shrink tubing or something along those lines. So on my 135s, I just simply paint them with the swipe of the paintbrush, and this gives a good illusion that the pieces are there with their knurled tips, and also gives us some more extra added color and detailing to the build as opposed to just leaving it black. The final thing to mention on the turret is the mini cupola, which is a direct carryover from, the M3 Lee, and for some reason it just works on the T6. It really does just flesh out the model, and it just makes the tank look so much cooler than having it with the standard, what would be the Sherman cupola. It's also kind of like a precursor to what we would see later on in the post-war years on the M48 and the M60, but now I'm rambling. As for the part itself, totally stock, nothing that was changed outside of the addition of the magnet that I mentioned before. And with that in place, I can pivot this thing any which way and not have to worry about anything falling off if the model is maneuvered. Same thing is also true, of course, for the turret. I could position this any which way because of the magnet locking system that I rendered and mentioned before. And that's all there is to mention about the detailing. This brings us to the paintwork. So for the paintwork, I went with a early shade of American Olive Drab. This is something that I've utilized on several other of my builds for vehicles for the very early war time frame, which of course the T6 most certainly is. The color itself is my own custom mix. It is an exterior latex, and I went ahead and applied it to the model with the airbrush with my usual techniques. Prior to the base coat being applied, of course, the entire model was thoroughly coated with a coat of primer, and for my primer is just, you guessed it, El Cheapo flat black spray paint from the Home Depot. After the entire model was coated with the primer, I then went ahead and added the base coat with the airbrush, and then the following weathering that came afterwards was also done with the airbrush, as well as also with some dry brushing. The airbrushing is done for the fading effects and the counter shading. I'm not sure if the fading effects on this one, no, there are definitely no filters on this one. It's just a little bit of fade. Diluted cream was utilized, again, exterior latex of my own mix. And the counter shading was done with the use of a darker shade of Olive Drab, which I believe was Tamiya on this one, and also with just some Tamiya flat black diluted to tone down the opacity for the streaking effects that you see here. The chipping is done in my usual format, again with the use of some dry brushing with some flat black and applied with a fan brush. I do show some of these techniques in several of the OTR videos in case you are interested to see exactly how I go about with the paint application. Generally on these builds, I would go ahead and throw in some decals. However, on this one here, I left it markingless for two reasons. One, the kit does not supply you with any markings whatsoever, and for the subject matter, it wouldn't have any markings. This vehicle here, being a test vehicle, from all the surviving photographs that exist, didn't even have any TO&E marks or anything along those lines, and was just left in the El Natural Olive Drab state like you see here. So for this one here, I went with that type of format. Of course, if you're building one of these and you want to go with a what if, or it looks appealing to you to have some stars on it, which I don't blame you, it would look pretty sexy with some stars, you can easily do so. Finding US stars in 1/35 scale is something that's really easily done. In fact, chances are if you're watching this video and you're interested in this, you've probably already built a few American tanks before in 135, and chances are you probably have a few decals floating around in your stash. If that's the case, go ahead and use them on this build, and they sure turn out quite nicely, depending on, of course, the quality. Even though this vehicle is not marked in one way, shape, or form or another, I still went ahead and thoroughly coated the vehicle with the VMS matte varnish, just because, again, I like how the end result looks after utilizing that product. I seriously cannot stress how awesome that product is and how great it looks on the build in its final condition like you see here. And that's all there is about this particular build. However, since I still have you, and if you're able to stick around through the video to this point, I want to say thank you, and you get a nice little reward, because we can go ahead and compare and contrast the T6 medium tank with a standard garden variety M4A1 Sherman tank. This model here, by the way, is a subject matter of its very own model showcase video. It's a Dragon, a vintage 1990s Dragon M4A1. Absolutely love it. Excellent kit. But this one here is a perfect vehicle to compare and contrast the way the vehicle started out with the T6 and how it eventually wound up as the M4A1. Now, there are a few vehicles that would be in between these ones here in terms of production. This one here is, I believe, would be referred to as a mid-production M4A1. There was a early and an initial production vehicle, and those did feature several other details that carried over from the T6, and then eventually they worked themselves out when the vehicle hit this point. However, for the purposes of this video here, the Dragon example of the M4A1 is a good representative, and it's a good keystone to show exactly basically where the vehicle ended. So here you can see the two side by side. Obviously you can see exactly how the vehicle evolved from this point over here. Some really quick notable differences are with the side section of the armor. So originally the T6 had a M3 Lee style of side access hatch right over there for the crew to get in and out of the vehicle. And on the M4A1 here, you can see that that was deleted because this was deemed to be a weak point in the armor, so they went ahead and just replaced it by having the piece just be solid metal. In order to do this, you'll see that on the top portion here, there is only one crew hatch for the driver, while the radio operator here would be entering and exiting the vehicle via the side hatch. Obviously, with that eliminated, they need to revise the section over here in order to allow the crew member to get inside. And on the M4A1, you can see how they just simply added a hatch to the front section right over here. Also, you'll see the armament, the bow M1919 has this distinctive ball mount feature with the tarpaulin rail wrapped around it, while on the T6 we had originally two Browning 1919s right here hard mounted to the hull, and this was controlled by the driver, and the radio operator had his very own pivotable M1919, but you can see that the arc of motion is much more restricted compared to the later design here found on the standard M4A1. Also at this point here, there are no tarpaulin rails found on the hull. These would actually be added to the T6 later on in the 1940s time frame, as the vehicle did, like I stated before, get several upgrades as time went on. However, interestingly enough, the tarpaulin rails for the bow 1919s were very different and were unique to the T6, so that's just something that's a little strange. Another thing that is a bit different are the headlight locations. You'll see these ones here are basically from the M3 Lee, where they were fender mounted, while on the production unit of the M4A1, they moved them to the hull and housed them in these distinctive brush guards. The siren, however, still stayed on the fender. Some M4A1s would mount them in the center portion over here, but this one is more typically seen in this format. This one is a direct carryover, of course, from the original T6. As for transmission covers, this one here is the second pattern where it's an all-cast transmission cover where it's a single piece. The three-piece was also used on several versions of the M4A1, but also they eventually went ahead and swapped it out with this one here because this design was more efficient and was also stronger and thicker compared to the three-piece counterpart. Another very quick difference is with the layout here of the front blower. On the M4A1 production units, this section here was dedicated to a blower found on this area over here, while on the T6, this was actually an antenna mount, as you can see right here. What's also interesting to point out is that the welded versions of the Sherman, this is true for the original M4 all the way up to the late production M4A3s, had a radio mount mounted on the hull, and it's usually covered with a small little cover cap. This is something that is found on those patterns of the vehicle, and it's a carryover from the T6. However, the actual M4A1s, which is a direct vehicle from the evolution of the T6, doesn't have that. Instead, it has the blower on the side. It's an interesting little data point. Of course, the T6 utilizes the M3 Lee pattern of suspension, while on the M4A1 that we have here, we have the later production the second pattern of VVSS. You can see how they differed from one another. This one here was more robust and durable compared to the one on the M3. Also, on this vehicle here, the entire lower hull was welded, while on this one here, it was riveted. And again, there are some versions of the M4A1 that I stated are in between here, where it's a transitional type model where it featured the M3 Lee suspension as well as also the riveted hull, and this would eventually work itself out to the variant that we have here. Another thing I do want to mention at this time is you can see the width of the track between the ones for the M2 and also the track for the M4. As I mentioned before, this is something that will catch your eye if you're in the know with Shermans, but if not, the stock ones should work just fine. But again, I might as well bring it to table, otherwise it would be video malpractice if I didn't. On the rear portion of the hull, I do want to mention the geometry of the rear casting. You can see how it's covering up, or it goes all the way up to the rear sponson section. And then we have this cutout over here for access to the engine hatch. The exhaust manifolds are on the top and would vent out the exhaust in that manner. And we also have these oil bath air filters found on either side. While on the T6, we have here a M3A1 Lee pattern of rear casting where it has this cutoff section over here. We have the pepper pot style exhaust, and we still have that screen mesh area in the top portion, but later on this would be used where the exhaust smoke, or I should say the exhaust stacks would emerge from in order to vent out the exhaust. The rear engine hatch, however, is exactly the same. Again, it's also important to point out that several versions of the initial production batch of M4A1s featured and carried over the pepper pot style exhaust, and then there were even a few other vehicles that were some transitions in between where they replaced the pepper pots with access panels and then dropped on those same air filters that I mentioned before. But again, that's a better topic for another video. On the top portion here, you get to see the taillights. Again, this here is what we more typically expect to see on these vehicles. The cat's eye in the appropriate location housed in a brush guard, while on the T6 that's not the case. Also, the engine deck. This one here has the engine deck from the M3 Lee with all of the tools and axis grill work included, while on the M4A1s, they featured this setup that we have here, which is distinctive to the Sherman family. Both vehicles would have been powered by this same exact Continental radial engine as, again, from the M3 Lee. On the turrets, you'll see that on the later production versions of the Sherman, there was a provision for a spare or a secondary antenna base mount. This was just not found on the T6. We just had the main antenna mount right here in the traditional location. Of course, this carried over on all the Shermans with the 75. You can see also how the M3 Lee pattern of hinged pistol port here evolved into the shell ejection port that we all know and recognize on Shermans. On the opposite side is just a solid casting, while on the T6 we have that really cool little pistol port here. It probably gives some extra visibility, but it was deemed to be a weakness in the armor. It wasn't really necessary, so it was 1086. Other thing to mention are no real provisions for lifting the turret, as you can see. Again, this was something that would change on later variants. On the front portion of the turret, we go to the gunner's optic right over here. It's in this nice little housed little cubby, or I should say little bread box, basically what it reminds me of. While on the production units, it was revised, and the gunner's optic is in this little well here that would pop up and would have a hinged plate. Eventually, there would be a metal cast steel guard found in this section over here just to protect it from any sort of damage. On the top, we also have a secondary periscope, a smoke grenade launcher, provisions for a searchlight, and also a blower. All of these details are just not present on the original T6 turret, and it's essentially just flat up there. Of course, the mantlet would also change. The mantlet originally had no protective collar on this section over here to protect the mantlet, while later production versions, they went ahead and did that. And this one here is actually a somewhat early version of the M34 mantlet, where we have the little skinny section here that protects the rotor, and obviously this too would change as the vehicle would be further developed. But you can see exactly how the design carried over from this format to this one. Also on the armament, there is a bit of a difference too. The T6 had the original short barrel found on the M3 Lee, while later on the Shermans, when they entered into full production, had the longer version of the 75. The shorter one necessitated the two counterweights that we see doubled up right here on the end, giving it its distinctive look, while on the production units that was no longer necessary. And finally, the last thing to mention are the cupolas. So you can see that the original one had that M3 Lee mini turret right over here with a 1919. While on the production Shermans, it had the split ring and then later the panoramic cupola, but that came later on. The split ring can also fully rotate and had the provisions for mounting any type of MG, be it from a Browning 1919 to a Browning M2HB. Either which can be mounted on this system over here, and that just wasn't the case with the mini cupola, or the mini turret, I should say, found on the T6 prototype. And in the end, this build here was absolutely perfect. I mean, this was as close to a perfect build that I could possibly have envisioned. From start to finish, there weren't any wacky complications or anything along those lines. This thing basically just flowed, and I am just in love with it. This is a build I really was anticipating. It was a build I was always wishing someone would create, and having the opportunity to build one and have it in my collection in this condition no less, I couldn't ask for anything more. This was a beautiful build. I literally have hearts just overflowing out of me. But then again, I am a Shermanaholic, so, you know, that goes, I'm a bit biased on the subject. Either way, I couldn't have been any happier in how this one turned out. Which, of course, slingshots us directly into skill level and recommendations. So, straight out of the gate, if you are a beginner builder, you're the type of person that never touched a plastic model kit in your life before, then look elsewhere. This is most certainly not going to be the kit for you. Also, on a similar note, if you're an intermediate builder and your only experiences with working with standard injection molded polystyrene kits, perhaps this kit may also be something that may not necessarily be to your skill sets. To further elaborate what I was mentioning before, if you're the type of person that is used to just cracking open a box, taking some parts off of a sprue, deburring them, gluing them together, and basically calling it a day, then this kit here and kits like this are going to be well outside your comfort zone. As I mentioned earlier in this video and shown in the build portion of this video, there are certain areas of this build that needed some reconstructive work, as well as also some sculpting and adjustments, not to mention some fine tuning. And all of these type of techniques are some techniques that a lot of individuals out there just don't have or are not that comfortable with. And this is generally true for people who are a beginner and even mostly an intermediate. Even some advanced builders out there, there's some people who I know that have quite big collections of plastic models, and they've built some really advanced super kits that are on the market today that are very elaborate and very complex. And even those individuals may have some difficulty with dealing with some of the reconstructive work that are present on some of these type of models. If you're used to working with old school cast resin kits, then this is definitely going to be something that you're going to take to like a duck to water. But if you're just used to plastic kits, this may be something that is going to be a bit of a learning curve. Fortunately for this kit over here, it's such a simple kit that, yes, this one here did require some small adjustments here or there, but because of the adjustments being not that severe, this is something that potentially a individual out there can get to master, and if that's the case, this could be a great foray into the other kits that are similar to this that are on the market, which if that's the case, I definitely recommend, because the subject matters on a lot of these kits out there are really cool, just like this one here, and these are the type of things that are just not necessarily going to be seen in plastic kit form, or at least in the immediate future, I should say. If you are the type of person that have those skill sets all ironed out and squared away, then this kit here becomes a viable option for you. This kit builds into a very beautiful rendition of a very unique vehicle, and it's one that builds very quickly and effortlessly. Although you can keep the out-of-the-box format and not lift a finger to change anything, and if that's the case, it'll build into a decent representation of the T6. However, where this kit shines, in my opinion, is that it is a beautiful blank canvas that you, the builder, can do basically anything you want to improve upon, and that is where this kit really comes into its own. As we saw in this video, I went to great lengths describing all of the details that were made to polish the kit up in the condition that we have here. However, this still leaves room for improvement if the builder chooses to do so. This being a 1/35 scale Sherman variant, there are almost an endless amount of accessories out there that can be added to the model to polish it up even further from what I've brought to the table. Some notable examples would be some brass 1919 barrels from Aber. The brass Panzer Art MP48 spring antenna base would be a beautiful addition to add to this model. Although the kit ones are perfectly fine, the Panzer Art one is definitely, in my opinion, the best one on the market. Then we have some replacement headlights, taillights. You can get the ones with the clear prisms in them to replace the solid opaque rest of the ones that the kit gives you. And not to mention, we also have the VVSS. There are workable track links out there from Mini Art as well as a V-Clip, to name a few. And if you are so inclined, you could swap out the VVSS suspension with, again, a number of different options that are on the market. You can roll with an M3 Lee suspension like this one here and be more traditional, or you can throw on a standard VVSS suspension if you want to roll with a what-if type format. Everything is on the table, and this kit here really does accept all these accessories quite well. Like I said before, it is the perfect blank canvas if you just want to mess around with a Sherman pattern vehicle. And as I stated in my 1/6 scale Sherman tank content, the almost infinite amount of details and customization is what makes these vehicles so much fun to work on. And that positions us directly into recommendations. So straight from the gate, if you are a Sherman fan, you are a Shermanaholic or a ride or die Sherman guy, this kit is not recommended. It is absolutely mandatory. If you do not have this kit in your collection, you cannot call yourself a Sherman fan. You literally can't. In fact, your Sherman fan status has been revoked, and you must either shred your card or put it in the mail and send it back to the Sherman fan club, because there's just no other way around it. This vehicle here is absolutely crucial to have in your collection if you're a Sherman guy. If you got the M4, the M4A1, the A2, the A3, the E8, the E9, whatever, this kit here should be in your collection because it is literally patient zero, and it's the birth of the tank family. This vehicle here, I always remember seeing photographs of in books and online, and I remember drooling to myself saying, oh, that's such a cool vehicle, it's such a cool variant, I totally want one in my collection. And so finally to have one, first, as soon as I saw it online, I'm like, yeah, that's mine, I'm buying it. And so finally to have one and have it built and built to this condition over here, it just checks all the boxes. To the casual observer out there who sees this, they're like, oh, it's just another Sherman, big deal. But if you are a Sherman guy, this here is the type of thing that gets your blood pumping. It really is. Gets you hot under the collar. This is what you live for if you're a Sherman guy, vehicles like this. And this one here is just a magnificent addition to add to your collection. Along similar lines, if you're a fan of US military vehicles or just US tanks in general, the T6 here is another no-brainer. It is literally patient zero of the Sherman tank family, and as I've seen a reference online, it is the birth of a legend. The other person I'd recommend this kit to would be anyone who's just into World War II armor, or even, again, prototype vehicles. There are some people out there that dig the wacky prototypes, and the T6 here, although admittedly it's more of a conservative prototype, but it's still a prototype nonetheless, and it's definitely an interesting footnote to have in your collection. Another person I'd recommend this kit to is, again, if you're the type of person that's just looking for something different. Although this is, again, just quote-unquote yet another Sherman, there is just something about the T6, though, that really has some flavor to it compared to your standard garden variety M4A1. Again, it's just a very unique and interesting piece in all, and it kind of looks like, again, it's the missing link between the M3 Lee and the M4 Sherman. Also, as I've mentioned before on vehicles similar to this that I brought to the table, namely the Tamiya M3 Bradley, as well as also the old school SG M1 Abrams, there is just something about having an example or rendition of a vehicle type in its original, as designed or as adopted format. There's just something about it in that, skies, where this is exactly what the designers anticipated and what they were planning, and then it's interesting to see how that would change after some subsequent usage and research and development. And this kit here absolutely fits into that type of format. Of course, being a 1/35th scale tank model, this more than lends itself for some diorama usage. Although on this one here, you may have to modify the tank fully if you want to have the vehicle with its hatches rendered in the open position. However, with the subject matter being what it is, and with the era that this vehicle represents, you can pair this very well with something like the Bantam Jeep. That is, again, a 1/35th scale, I believe, from Mini Art. Not to mention any of the number of the other M3 Lee pattern of vehicles from Mini Art or Tacom, to name a few. On a similar note to what I stated before, if you're looking for something different, the vendor and the company that produces this kit are really just crushing it right now, in my opinion, on the market. Seems like every time I log on to eBay, which is something I really shouldn't do, and I check out their store, which is another thing I really shouldn't do, I'm always blown away with the subject matters and the kits that they are coming out with almost on a regular basis. So if you're looking for something crazy and bizarre, I can't recommend having that vendor saved in your favorites bar. Honestly, this is the second one that I've done from this company. However, at the time of filming this, I've done about 7 or 8 of these SS tank kits, and there are going to be some really interesting subject matters that are going to be posted on this channel in the coming months. And yes, I actually do have several more on the way coming from the vendor because I'm crazy and they're just producing really cool stuff. I can't resist. that's all I could say. But again, as for what they are, you just have to sit and wait on that one. But needless to say, I got some cool stuff rolling out very soon. Of course, that information is best left up to those videos when they eventually make their debut. And with that, that is the perfect point to wrap up this model showcase video for the 1/35th scale American T6 Sherman tank prototype. If you like this video, be sure to subscribe to this channel, where it is a fantastic way of keeping up to date on new posted content, being 1/35th scale model showcase videos like the one that you just watched, or the other larger scale project update videos that frequently get posted to this channel. Another way to keep in the loop of new posted content is by liking us on Facebook. There, I have more photographs of this particular build, as well as photographs of the other smaller and larger scale builds that frequently get posted to this channel. Furthermore, don't forget to swing by eastcoastarmory.com for more 1/6 and 1/16 scale builds and detail components. Thanks again. I'll be seeing you all again on the next one. See you there.